Here we are, guys. This is Montana's moose, sheep, and goat video that I promised you guys probably about a month ago that I was going to do. And I specifically claimed that Montana is losing about half of all its moose, sheep, and goat tags every decade. And I got a lot of messages about that claim. And it's going to be interesting as we look through some of these statistics. I dug back all the way from 1970 all the way up through the course of our modern history, anyway, the last 50 years or so of tag allocations for moose, sheep, and goat in Montana, and kind of what is going on with these populations of these species in the state. So if you're not a subscriber, please subscribe below, give me a like, thumbs up. Check out some other videos. The other video I did was on Yellowstone Park and the trophic cascade and what's happening there with the wolf, and then also what is happening to the elk in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. So it's a lot of interesting things that are going on, and there's all these factors that play a large role in the movement of our big game here in the Western United States. But I want you guys to know that ultimately my main concern is to see great outcomes for all of our wildlife, and that's moose, sheep, goat, deer, elk, antelope, all the predators, just good outcomes. So that's what's really important to me, and that's why I wanted to talk about this subject today, and that's moose, sheep, and goat in Montana. So let's dive right into it. So first off, we're going to take a look at the charts. So I compiled the numbers, and what I did was every 2 years, I just got a total tally of tags offered in the state of Montana for each species. So for moose, that's where we're going to start, because moose, I feel like, is there's the most information about them. It might be the most controversial because of what's happening, that they're studied quite a bit. And Montana FWP just released what I thought was a very interesting study, Solving Montana's Moose Mysteries. It was a 10-year study in 3 areas across the state about why are moose declining, or in a couple spots, why are they increasing in population. So we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, just a great level of information here. I was able to dig back way deep on some online archives of state tag allocations from all the way back in the day for all the species. So it's very interesting, very enlightening, and I actually really enjoyed doing my research. So the moose chart, as you can see here, back in 1968, we were up there at 726 tags allocated back, what is that, 55 years ago. So a long time ago. Then we had a dip, we went down, perhaps over allocation of tags. This is once again before wolf, before the rise of the grizzly bear. Predators were still managed back then, probably a little bit more stricter than they are today when it comes to black bears and mountain lions. And so maybe there was some overhunting going on in the 80s, maybe by the dip of the population. But what I thought was very interesting, and it's crazy going back and looking at these old regulations, large amounts of moose tags that they're allocating. So there were like serious numbers back then. The hurdle is that moose are very hard to count and very hard to keep track of. And so we will get into that a little bit too with this study that happened in Montana over the last decade as well. But as you can see, ultimately, down it went to the 90s, and then we saw a big rise in allocation to about 1995, and then a steady decline in tag allocations all the way to present time, and we're currently at historic lows in moose allocations, like down near 300 tags. So a fraction of what it used to be in the 90s even, and we topped out in 1990 at 748 moose tags allocated in the state. So we're down quite a bit. So moose, man, they're kind of tricky. They're elusive. They're hard to count, like I said. They are not a herd animal, so they live for the most part a solitary life. I'm not going to go through this 4-page study too in depth, but I have like some great key points down here below. And so what they studied was predation, of course, habitat, just calf survival rates. As wildlife science shows us, that fawn, calf, and lamb and kid recruitments are the driving factor in a population, whether it's growing or declining. So calf recruitment, super important. That's the driving factor. They did point out here in the study that there is a perception that a pack of wolves is responsible for killing adult moose, and that largely is not the main cause, which makes sense to me. If you have large groups of wolves, a large pack of wolves, I remember back in the 2000s, we're talking a pack of wolves in the 20s in the Lolo area of Idaho. They're going to be much more efficient at taking down adult animals than what we're seeing in Montana specifically now, which is a pack average of 4 to 5 animals. So they're going to have a little bit harder time taking down adult moose. That's kind of my takeaway from their claim. So I don't really doubt that. So adult mortality, this is what they found. They collared a ton of moose. So they said 57 collared cow moose that have died so far. 34% perished from arterial worms and other health-related causes. So, they have these collars on these moose. They get mortality signals. They can go check on them. So, arterial worms, what is that even? So, I looked into arterial worms, and these worms, they are spread by flies, and the main host of these arterial worms were from mule deer, of all things. The difference is that mule deer have different passageways of blood running through their body with their vein and artery systems, whereas moose have a little bit different. And specifically, I'm not a biologist. I don't know if my lingo is going to be exactly correct, but this is what I understood when I talked to a biologist on Guy Eastman's moose hunt. His bull actually had these arterial worms as well. And so what they find is these moose get bit in the forehead or somewhere on the face, and as the flies inject whatever they're injecting while they're sucking blood, they release these eggs into the circulatory system of these animals, and they float through the body and they mature, and then the eggs pool up in the neck area of a moose, and there's kind of a weird elbow in their artery, and there's kind of a dip in there, and it's kind of a spot where these worms congregate and they get stuck in the flow of blood. Super interesting stuff. And what eventually happens is these older moose, once you're talking 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, over time this affects them, and eventually those worms cut off blood supply to their brain, and eventually mortality happens. And so that's what they're seeing, and they specifically saw the arterial worm mortality in the Big Hole region, which is down in this area of Region 3. And so I thought that was very interesting. So that was the number one cause of mortality in adult moose. So 2 other studies, or study areas that they also took a look at, was up here in the Cabinet Salish Mountains. And then they looked at the front. They call it the front here in Region 4, just north of Helena, the Rocky Mountain front. And this is actually one of the areas that is doing well. Moose populations are on the rise in Region 4, so that is a bonus. That's a highlight. That's a positive note for moose in Montana, and that's in Region 4. In Region 3, they're declining. In Region 1, they're declining. And there's still many other factors that have to do with that. So another factor is parasites, which they really looked at, and they call them winter ticks. And they've seen a large decline of moose populations in the Northeast and even in Minnesota from winter ticks. And they say here that, if a moose has 50,000 or more ticks on one animal, that can create blood loss and eventually kill a moose. But they didn't really find that to be a cause of adult mortality on moose in Montana. And what they said here, on moose in the 3 Montana study areas, researchers found winter ticks numbers ranging from a few hundred to 8,000 per animal. The highest tick loads were along the front, so in here, but the front also had the highest rate of twins, and they also had the biggest population increase. And so you can't really chalk up to the death of these adult moose from winter ticks in the state of Montana. So that was kind of nixed, that was factored out. Okay, last and perhaps the most interesting is the calf recruitment. Of the 57 collared cow moose, 11 died from predators, wolves, grizzly bears, and mountain lions. 4 from humans, so hunting, vehicle accidents, poaching, very small amounts from actual human causes. So that wasn't really considered, an issue when it comes to mortality. But predators, so this is the biggest thing when it comes to a driving factor in moose populations or any ungulate population is how long can a calf survive through that first year of its life to be adult, live on its own, and be a little bit more defensive to predators. That's the hugest factor. So the highest recruitment for calves in the state was Region 4. And stated right here, that's probably due to less predation and nutritional habitat. They listed that as a reason, but through their study, they did see that the nutrition-wise, through all 3 study areas, the moose had very similar amounts of fat on them when they studied them. And so they kind of threw out the nutrition factor as being a cause of moose declining. Like, these animals aren't in bad shape. They're in good shape, but populations are still declining. So nutrition-wise, they saw everything was pretty much jiving in all 3 regions. So nutrition is good for moose. So moose are browsers. They eat shrubs. That's their number one choice of forage. They did see that there was some grazing going on in Region 3 when moose would hit up haystacks. So maybe that's something to take a look at. Maybe they're, in these grazing areas, they're around livestock more. There's more flies. There's more of these bites and arterial worms, maybe. Who knows? It's very interesting stuff. So to go back to the recruitment part, so this is what I see the number one factor on how we can help our moose, sheep, and goat populations. And this is predator management. Now, I know it seems like I'm beating a dead horse and I'm complaining about predators and grizzly bears and wolves, but there's truly something here, and I'm very grateful that some of the state wildlife agencies have implemented predator culling programs to actually see what's going on and see tangible results over something that we can control. So as wildlife managers, as humans, we can make these populations, help these populations, all populations, be more robust and more healthy with some interjection. That's the beautiful thing of wildlife management. So what do I exactly mean by that? So there's some hard science, some hard facts out there now. And one of the examples I wanted to pull was the Mulchatna caribou herd in the state of Alaska. And what they saw over the course of the last 30 years is a sharp decline in caribou numbers. The Mulchatna caribou herd peaked around 1999 at 200,000 animals. So there's not a lot of caribou left. So what the Department of Game and Fish did in Alaska is they implemented a culling program. And first, they took a 10-year study, and they studied the number one cause of caribou calf mortality in their first few weeks of life, and that was from brown bears. And that was a 10-year study. So once again, brown bears, this is what they came up with. Brown bears are responsible for 90% of calf mortality in the first 2 weeks of their life. So in 2023, Alaska Game and Fish removed 81 brown bears and 14 wolves from the calving grounds of the Mulchatna caribou herd. Okay, so this is in an area of about 530 square miles. And so that's about the size of the Phoenix, Arizona Valley area. Like it's a big area, but in the grand scheme of things of Alaska, it's not that big. So that's a huge number of predators that they took from this area of the calving grounds of the caribou. So here's the exciting part. The following year, after the predator removal from the calving grounds, the survival rate of these caribou calves went from 23 calves per 100 cows to 44 calves per 100 cows in the first 2 weeks of their life. So we doubled the calf survival rate by removing this localized predator population on the calving grounds. So I think there's a lot of potential there if we can implement some management tactics in these small localized area where moose calve, where bighorn sheep lamb, and where mountain goats kid. So there's something to be said about that when it comes to direct removal of predators. That's an approach that us as humans we actually can control. We can't control winter weather. We can't control winter die-off. We can't control the climate. We can't control wildfires. To a degree we can, but it's one of those things that we can directly control, and we're starting to see game management departments using those tactics because the numbers don't lie. So to kind of wrap up the moose, there we go, 3 study areas: large decline in moose populations, historical lows of tag allocations in the state of Montana. So I'm going to let you know what we can do collectively as a whole, as conservationists, as sportsmen, as wildlife lovers, as people that, for me, I just want to preserve this resource for the next generation. And my son, he's 5 years old, and in 20 years, moose, sheep, and goat hunting opportunity could go away in the United States. That's a possibility if we don't change our management tactics a little bit. So it's just something to think about. That's probably one of the larger concerns for me, is having a viable hunting resource for the next generation. It's super important. So let's move on to bighorn sheep. So bighorn sheep are a tough one. Sheep are very susceptible to disease. They're very susceptible to change in the landscape, fires, and so they're very hard to manage. So let's pull up the chart, the tag allocations over the last 50 years in the state of Montana. And you can see back down to 1970, actually 1968, there wasn't even 100 tags available for bighorn sheep in the state of Montana. So over time, that grew, and then it got to like a mid 90s high, and then it plummeted down below 200 tags in the early 2000s. And then we had a short little peak in 2008, and then we've seen some decline ever since. And now we're right around that 100 tags allocated mark, which was about where we were at in 1968. So that right there, we've lost 2/3 of our sheep tags in the last 10 years in the state of Montana. That's a huge decline, and that's a problem. Once again, we're back down to 1968 levels before there was really the Sheep Foundation and many other agencies before that even happened. So one other thing I wanted to note was the bighorn sheep in the Missouri River breaks were not even a thing until the early 80s. So transplants took place. They grew this robust sheep herd over the course of several years in the Missouri River breaks and other areas in the state. And largely, the work that the Sheep Foundation and that the state of Montana has done to help sheep and really get them in as many areas as possible to just make that state herd a little bit more robust. And it's a world famous herd. We have some of the largest bighorn sheep in the world. They've done a lot of work, and there's been a lot of success, but I think, the numbers show that how fragile they are. And specifically when I say how fragile they are, we're talking about disease. And growing up as a kid, and still now, like, I've always aspired to draw a sheep tag. I've been on some sheep hunts with friends, and maybe that's all I might experience in my life, is to go on other sheep hunts. And I'm okay with that. I don't have to kill a bighorn sheep. So what we've seen throughout the state are these die-offs, these pneumonia die-offs of bighorn sheep, and it usually takes quite a big toll on a sheep herd once it gets into the herd. And so anytime these sheep become in contact with domestic sheep or goats, this is where it has become a problem. And that's ultimately where these pneumonias come from, are domestics. And you can't always control, what private landowners or what folks are gonna, have sheep on the range. But I think it needs to be really seriously looked at, especially in the coming years when we see how low of sheep numbers and tag allocations that we actually have now. And that's to work with private landowners and do everything in our power to give landowners incentives not to run domestic sheep and goats in core bighorn sheep habitat and calving grounds. That's my opinion. I think that's what we need to do in the future to help these catastrophic die-offs and these populations nearly vanishing because of pneumonia. So lastly, what can we do to help wild sheep? Once again, we can look at predators, and we can look at what are the main predators of wild bighorn sheep. And it might be surprising to some people, it might not, but the number one predator is golden eagles, especially on the lambing grounds and the lambing areas. And when they're, a lamb is about 8 pounds when it's born, and you have some massive golden eagles that have a 6-foot wingspan, it's very easy for them to catch and kill young lambs and mountain goat kids as well. So we have golden eagles, we have coyotes, and we have mountain lions. Those are kind of the three predators. You can imagine in some of the places that the bighorn sheep and mountain goats live, it's very rocky. It's very hard for most predators to move around that type of country. Hence why you have mountain lions and golden eagles, and coyotes are always in the mix on predation for all big game because they literally flourish everywhere. So that has to be a factor too. And I do want to shout out Wyoming Game and Fish and some other local state agencies that have had some very purposeful coyote management on fawning grounds with some of the areas that are struggling in the states out west, of removing some coyotes from these like core areas of fawning grounds. And once again, through these core area predator removals of coyotes, we have been seeing fawn recruitment double. So it's working. There's no argument really that the numbers are working and the management is working, and it's ultimately just math, right? You take a predator from the landscape and you're going to have the prey animal survive longer. It's just math. And so when I'm talking about removing predators, and it doesn't mean I want to see these predators removed completely from the landscape. These are core fawn, calf, lamb grounds where these young ones are most susceptible during their first year of life. Just removing them from specific areas, and overall, this is not going to hurt populations of predators in the lower 48. Once again, we don't want them all gone. Okay, so let's move on to mountain goats, because these are another mystery animal. Really, they are. And the state, well, nobody can really figure out what's going on, but we are at historic lows. We seem to be at a bottom the last 5 years as far as what tags are being allocated in the state of Montana. Back in 1968, we started with 725 tags allocated. And here we are in the 2020s, and we're in the 179 range for allocations. And that's just a gradual decline all the way from 1970. So we dropped below 200 in 2018, and we've kind of stayed in that area since then. But goats are a tough one. It seems that goats are not doing as well in their native habitats in the state of Montana, and nobody can really figure out why. That's the kind of the challenge with it. But in some of the other areas that they were introduced, there are these success stories where populations really flourish, and for whatever reason, these are introduced habitats that have never had goats or sheep, for that matter, on them. A good example is Utah. They dropped in goats over the course of several years, and they're flourishing down there in a lot of these introduced habitats. So there's something to be said for it. And once again, goats are kind of a mystery. I don't think it takes very much as far as overhunting goes, because goats are so hard to determine whether it's a billy and nanny for I would say the general public. It can be a challenge. So if you have a relatively small population and you have too many nannies being taken out of that either sex pool of the tags, you could potentially cause a slow decline of population. That could be there. And so, yeah, tags are being cut as a result. So back to goats and predators. The number one predator to mountain goats Specifically, the kids are golden eagles, and mountain lions, they also are listed as a major predator of mountain goats. So this brings me to my next point, really, since we've covered moose, sheep, and goat, and we understand the decline of all three species a little bit. The sage grouse, very controversial bird species at current time because of the population decline in sage grouse. And through studies, through agencies have found the number one predator of sage grouse nests and young are ravens. And ravens have been protected since 1978 under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Anywhere you go, there's ravens everywhere across the West. Ravens, ravens, ravens. They are responsible for up to 90% of the mortality of sage grouse eggs and their young. They're the number one cause. I think the next one were bull snakes that eat the eggs. And so ravens are very proficient at what they do. And as they've also found too, if these sage grouse can just get to maturity, if they can get to adult age, they're almost unstoppable because predators have such a hard time killing them once they get to of age. So if you really want to look at the math of it, ravens are number one for causing the destruction of sage grouse nests. So I think it's something that's viably, we should be talking about this, removing ravens from core sage grouse habitat. This is something that us as wildlife managers can do to help these struggling species. So, there I said it. Let's manage some birds. Let's talk about managing some birds. Call me crazy, but it's something that we need to talk about and nobody is talking about it. So, I have no doubt it would help when it comes to recruitment. Okay, so lastly, what can you do? What can you do as a conservationist, as a nature lover, as a hunter, as a hiker, as just somebody that cares for the outdoors and wants to see state science-backed management of our wildlife and not emotional ballot box biology and other non-scientific methods of management? So number one, Endangered Species Acts, it needs some reform. So tell your senators, tell your representatives, let's get the Endangered Species Act reformed, plain and simple. And I know for a fact that in Montana and Wyoming, our Congress people, they know this. And this is in front of them, at the forefront of what they're talking about in DC and what is actually happening. So make sure that you, whether you see one of our Congress people in person, tell them that. That should be a number one talking point for any conservationist, for anybody that loves the great outdoors and our nation's wildlife, is let's get that Endangered Species Act reformed a little bit so we can use science-based management on our predators and our birds and our wildlife as a whole. So the second one, this is a big one. And so you have the Equal Access to Justice Act. And what that is it allows the average person to sue the government and not incur any financial damages if they lose the case. And so the purpose of this is for the small guy. If the little guy, maybe they felt like Uncle Sam screwed him over and they want to sue the government maybe over like VA benefits or Social Security or whatever the case may be, they can sue the federal government and not incur any damages if they lose the case. So it actually gives the small guy a little bit of lever towards the big system. So I don't believe that's a bad thing. However, NGOs, non-government organizations, nonprofits, they can also use this act to their advantage. So what they do, so you get like the Center for Biological Diversity, Defenders of Wildlife, Wild Earth Guardians, Earth Justice, etc. So these are environmentalist groups that use emotional judgment in reasons for not allowing hunting or not allowing something to be delisted. So what they do is they sue the federal government, they sue the state, and there are no repercussions to these groups if they lose the case. So they can sue, and get these management principles and delisting of the grizzly bears held up in courts time and year after year and essentially prevent the state from managing the animals because they're taking advantage of the Equal Access for Justice Act. And so, you know, these organizations, in reality, they're winning about 1 of 10 cases, but they're actually able to make money in some of these cases that they lose because of how they can build certain things out. But they're totally taking advantage of the Equal Access to Justice Act, and we need to get that reformed. So this will help limit these giant animal activists, animal rights groups. And these are groups that don't believe that humans, that hunters and conservationists should be on the landscape. They believe that nature should be hands-off, no human involvement. That's that. They don't like to see people on the landscape. So this is the opposition, guys. As conservationists, as hunters, this is what we need to take really seriously. All it takes are these environmentalist groups to get these management practices, these management proposals hung up in the courts, and then you get a liberal anti-hunting judge in there at the district court level, and you get it shut down. And then the state can't do their job. The state can't manage all of the wildlife for the greater good of America and for everybody that uses it. So that's what you can do. You can talk to your senators, you can talk to your representatives, send them an email and say, we need the EAJA Act reform and we need the ESA Act reformed, because that's ultimately what's stopping these state agencies from managing our big game populations. So there you have it. Once again, Montana, moose, sheep, and goat, historical low tag allocations. I'm alarmed. You should be alarmed. You should be alarmed. Everybody should be alarmed on what's going on. And we're seeing these opportunities for people in America slowly going away. And it's something that should be on the forefront of the table and the forefront of management, and what we can do to bolster these species in the American West. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me some comments. Don't get too ugly. Give me a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel. I appreciate you guys watching, and make sure you check out the other videos that I also did on Yellowstone and the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and we will see you on the next one.